lost upon me that packaging came up on the screen and the room moved away. I'm just going to tell you, don't be afraid of the packages. I'm really excited to be here with all of you, and I really appreciate squeezing me in this evening. And I'm excited to be our first Architect Evangelist on the team, and I'm happy to talk more about what that means. But I really want to get into talking about packaging. And of course, as a publicly traded company, I have to remind you that Salesforce wants you to make any purchasing decisions based on our currently available, completely awesome or otherwise technology, not any forward-looking statements that I or any of my colleagues that might be hiding in the room might say. So, given that caveat, we're going to talk about a few things, and these slides will be shared because we're going to go through this pretty rapidly because I do want time for Q&A. I think it's a topic that needs questions. But in large, we're going to talk about two general things. Packaging patterns, how do you think about creating those units, those modules within an org? And then some logistics around, okay, even if we go down this road, how do we start thinking about owning this thing long term? What do we do with things like dependencies? How do we move metadata between packages? Those are the two halves of what we're going to look at. So this slide I'm starting with because I think it's good to get the context of what in the world is this even coming from. So you may have seen this slide. Internally, we lovingly call this a marketecture slide. And it's a way of just rationalizing all the things that we give you from Salesforce, the platform that we give you, that essentially up at the top, all of those colorful icons are those apps that you know for sales or service or marketing or commerce, or those business-specific applications that let you add business-critical value faster. That's the promise that we make to you as a company and as a platform. And the reason we can make that kind of a promise is, of course, all those lovely layers beneath. The way we abstract different kinds of services and functionality and give them to you so that you don't have to worry about things like, is the org going to be available for people to log in today? How much bandwidth do we have on the network? That we're abstracting that functionality out so that you can deliver value. And on the side there, we see our box of Salesforce DX, which when we ask the question of who's using DX, I always want to ask what does DX even mean to you? Because there's a lot of things in that box. You can see it's sort of slicing up the stack. It's a lot of different stuff. And in with DX, snuck there down at the bottom, is the thing about release management. And that's really where packaging starts to sit. It's a fundamentally different way of releasing changes in your org. But it also ripples out from there. And that's what we're going to look at. So you'll see this slide maybe in a few different things, but the reason it's here is also because as you're looking for information about ways to release to your org, we as a company have started talking about it a little differently. We're now using two different general terms to talk about release management. We talk about org-based development and package-based development. Package-based development is probably a little more straightforward. It's using packaging, and that's what we'll talk about. But org-based development, you're going to notice this in documentation, in Trailhead, et cetera, and it's essentially a model of tracking changes where you're just looking at the diffs between orgs relative to time. And that's probably the way that most people who are not developing for an ISV have been developing to date. You've been doing org-based development, and you may not have known it, because essentially the source of truth for what you're releasing at a given time is one org relative to another. And it doesn't mean this is necessarily a terrible model. It just adds different kinds of complexity. But packaging is a model that hasn't been available to everyone in our ecosystem in the same way. But with the introduction of unlocked packages, that's changed. And that's what we're going to talk about. So unlocked packages are the mechanism, that second generation packaging, which those of you in the ISV land may know. It's the same mechanism under the hood. They first came out as something called developer-controlled packages. Unlocked packages, it's all the same thing. And it's a fundamentally different way of grouping together metadata and configuration for an org. And you get a lot of different benefits, as we can see here. It's letting you adopt a model of source-driven development. I mean, you have to use source in order to adopt this model, as we'll see. You get much more strict control and much more granular control of versions. You get to version the changes to your environment, which means you get nice things like rollback capability. If you install a package version and you are not liking what it does and you want to roll back or revert the changes, you just install the version that you want to go back to. It's the power of that ability to really control your org, all the way down to now dependency management and metadata organization. For people that aren't your release managers, that aren't your developers, they're going to see differences even just in an org. When you go under setup and you look at different pieces of the org, you're going to start to see that this field is part of a package. This Apex class is part of a package. It's a fundamentally different way of organizing and rationalizing the metadata in an org. And of course, at the bottom line, we want you to have an artifact that is repeatable, that's scriptable, that's trackable. So you have reliable releases and you know exactly what's moving from environment to environment. Okay, so this sounds great, but what does this mean in action? This is a newer technology, as you saw on the last slide, that unlocked packages have been GA since what, winter 19. Now we're coming up on a year of GA. And so the emerging current practices are, there are fundamentally two patterns right now that we've identified for thinking about abstracting to packages. That's horizontal and vertical, for lack of better names. And what does that actually mean? We're going to see two slides that look very similar to each other. They're pretty dense. And essentially this is, when you think about the two different models, what you need to do is, we have some things here on both models just for symmetry's sake, so you can see what we're dealing with. But if you go down to the bottom of the stack and then work your way past, we have some App Exchange packages installed, some managed packages, and then we have some basic developer libraries here. We're using Andy Fawcett's FF libraries right here, and these are patterns that I worked on in conversation with Andy Fawcett. So this is he and I arguing back and forth coming to this place. And so we'll see above these shared layers here that you're going to see in both patterns, we then have horizontal slices, essentially shared functionality across many of these packages. And that's the fundamental baseline of this model right now, is that you're abstracting out these horizontal slices of shared functionality. And then we see at the top that then we're going to get more fine-grained here in what's happening above there. The non-shared stuff is up at the top. And as we can see, there are pros and cons of shared packages help rationalize the organization of what's happening. Essentially, in this model, governance is more straightforward. There's a framework that you're executing against. If I'm a developer who may not have a lot of institutional knowledge, and I'm developing a new field, and maybe a trigger that's reacting to that field, and then a Lightning Web component that is for one business unit only, if I don't know where to put my changes, this model gives me a framework to tell me where I should put my changes. Well, my trigger code is probably going to go in a shared base package. My field should go wherever it is we're putting shared object data. And my Lightning Web component that's business unit specific might be in the UI layer for that specific business unit package. So it's much easier to say this is where I check in my changes. Of course, the con is if you don't know how to slice these horizontal slices to be actually usefully modular, you're just swapping the giant block that might be an unpackaged org for another kind of giant block. So there's complexity there. So you're trading off. Governance might be easier for this, might be a less efficient modularization pattern. For people that are adopting packaging, you might find this as a more straightforward initial package approach as you learn how to release around this. And then as you mature, you might find yourself then moving to something more like vertical slicing, where you're getting more modular from the beginning. So here we can see at the base, again, our same shared stuff happening, but we see at the bottom of our abstraction already things are not all the way shared. We're already getting more modular from the bottom. And in this model, you really need to let essentially developers control what's happening. The assumption here is that your engineering team is best suited to decide how you should be slicing your org, where the package boundaries are, what modularization actually means, because this model both allows you to adopt and requires more advanced patterns in your code base, in your application design. If you're going to get modular at a much lower layer, you need to be doing things like maybe using custom metadata to radically decouple the references in your org. And so as a developer coming into this kind of an org, if I don't have institutional knowledge about where things go, and I'm developing that field and that trigger and that Lightning Web component, I'm going to need some other kind of governance to make sure I'm checking in my changes correctly. So governance can be more complex, but the pros here are that setup of, say, a Scratch org. could be much faster and much simpler because we are getting truly much more modular in this model. Okay, so once we have decided on the pattern or the patterns we're going to deal with, then we have to manage things in source. And right now there are two patterns that you can choose from for managing how you're going to store those packages in source control. And essentially we have the same groups of packages here on the screen. Forget the typo that some of you may have already seen. We have on the left-hand side here 3 Salesforce DX project JSON files for the 3 different packages. So 1 package per project, which also means 1 package per repo. So here we have multiple repos. And here we have a mono repo. This is 1 project JSON with then our packages listed, all in the same project markup here. And it's supposed to be the same 3 packages. That's where my typo lives, but those are your big choices. So let's look at micro repos and mono repos. So we'll start with the mono repo, the single repo, multiple packages. This again is a lot like horizontal slicing in that this may be an easier way for you to start getting your feet under you because in essence your mono repo is a reflection of what's going into your org. You can keep an eye on what are the changes that are happening. If I'm that developer that doesn't know what I'm doing and I accidentally check something into the wrong package, you're going to be able to see it at the repo level right here. But as you get more and more mature in your packaging, if you have many, many, many different packages and you have hundreds of developers split across several different features with a mono repo, right now source control doesn't have a robust way of dealing with that. You're going to have a very strong, probably very strict branching and naming convention strategy. It's going to cause complexity then if you want to hook up continuous integration and continuous delivery tools. Then if I've named something wrong, what's happening with our CI/CD, and we have 50 packages in this repo, how reasonable is that? So there's a trade-off. This isn't the only place in the industry we see mono repos creeping up. As people adopt more and more microservices, governance is difficult when they're spread all over the place. So I think tools in source control are going to have to deal with this problem. But right now, you are going to have to rely on your branching strategy to rationalize fine-grained changes in a mono repo world. If you have more maturity in your org, you might be finding yourself wanting to move to something like multiple repos and multiple packages. That more fine-grained, we're going to abstract our packages out into dedicated repos. And then again, you're going to have to figure out your governance strategy then to catch. If someone's checked in something into the wrong package, when and where are you going to check that and catch that? And how are you then going to get an overview of what exactly is getting released into the org across all your different packages? That's a trade-off. But the benefit you get is that then you can have much more efficient branching within a repo. You're not having to worry about organizing things other than what's exactly happening to this one package. You're probably going to be able to release a lot faster with the multiple repo strategy. And again, ScratchOrg's setup is going to be faster here because you're getting more modular also from the beginning. Push and pull, those commands are designed to work against the entire Salesforce project.json. So if you have a very complex Salesforce project.json and you're pushing and pulling from a mono repo org, you might find that that's slow. So realistically, I think if you're going to try to adopt if you're going to adopt the mono repo approach, you're probably going to have to come up with different project JSON markups for actually different project units so that you're only paying attention to certain package directories as your developers are actually working, which then adds another layer of complexity. Well, how are you making sure those get in the repo the right way? How do you make sure developers are then checking out the right project JSON as they're working? It's another layer of complexity. You're sort of not following the canonical shape of how the files were meant to be used to make source control work. You're going to have to think about those trade-offs. So now some stuff about logistics. So in theory, you have a packaging strategy. You've worked out how you're going to begin to debut this thing in source control. And then what does that mean? So I want to look at release management here, and I'm going to go back on my animation. So this is just a basic landscape of essentially how you'd be setting up your environments. That we have the most iterative phases of development all the way over there on the right. That's where we're doing the most raw parts of our development. And then, of course, we have our release environments over here on the left. And you can see that we have scratch orgs introduced at the baseline in this model, because part of the benefit of being modular is that we can use very fast to spin up orgs, do our work, and then get rid of them. So we're going to be using force source push and force source pull, making very fine-grained changes to our packages, checking those changes into source control. And then as you move in higher orgs, and I need to update the slide because it's not exactly verbatim, but then the theory is that as you move into higher orgs, more high fidelity orgs, you're not going to be doing a metadata deploy, you're going to be installing a package. You're going to have a package version created, and you will install it, and that's how you're going to keep orgs in sync. The part to be careful about is I think this is not the right place to be creating a package version in your real world implementation. You may even find that this place is a little risky depending on how often you're releasing, how many packages you're working on, because we as a platform limit your ability to request a package version creation, because it's an expensive transaction on the back end, because we're essentially validating that that package version is accurate, that you've abstracted all the dependencies, that when you call for us to install it, we can actually install it and things don't blow up. So it takes a while for that command to complete. It's an expensive kind of transaction, so we limit it pretty aggressively. So if you're going to be calling for a package version create, essentially every time a developer checks in a change, which I talked to a team that was actually accidentally doing this because they didn't know any better, and they hooked it up to CI/CD, you're going to burn through your package version create limits pretty quickly. And to be honest, if you know that you're down here in QA or even UAT where changes are probably going to be happening, more likely than not, you don't have a lot of confidence in that package version. You want to be versioning your package when you are more confident that that's an artifact you want to have hang around for a while. Because the value of that packaging artifact is that you can install it in those orgs and you know you're getting the same thing. You can validate whether or not you've handled your dependencies correctly, whether or not what you think will be a package version will move into an org well without having to use that package install command. You can do that just using the CLI and metadata deploy. And about a year ago, maybe a little more, I wrote a blog series about working with the first parts of packaging when it was earlier, and I talk about how you can look at how you're managing your dependencies. Parts of that series is out of date, but this is how you can see if you've done the right thing just with the CLI part is still accurate. Okay, so we're pushing and pulling for our fine-grained changes. Higher fidelity environments, we're going to install our packages, and that's the baseline of this model. And then, of course, UI-based change sets, or those things that you get to when you hit setup and type in change set, and then find yourself there in the UI. Those are still in this model. You won't lose the ability to release that way. You won't lose the ability to release via metadata API. So then you're going to need to think about governance-wise, how are you making sure everything's rationalized? Some things you may not want to release them in a package, because when you do this package version install, if I have checked in a change set and say installed it all the way to our training sandbox, and it's not reflected in the package version, but say we have a page layout that I did something to with a change set, changed, and then we install the package version in the sandbox, guess what's going to happen to my changes? It's going to be gone. So if there's something that you know that changes pretty quickly, or that you like being able to do ad hoc changes, things like page layouts might be a good example of this, you need to think about whether or not it's going to be valuable to actually package that thing and then have the risk of maybe it's going to be out of date with a hotfix somebody did. Are you going to be able to then go back and somehow check that into source control and reissue a package version create command for adding a new field onto a page layout? Maybe you will. Maybe that's how your org works. But maybe you won't, and maybe you want to leave some things unpackaged and figure out how you're synchronizing then the things that aren't tracked the same way in source control with what's in source control in your package versions. Okay, we have a couple of slides here that just show information, because we have new tools and things and stuff coming out. So scratch orgs, we talked about people were using them a lot like developer sandboxes. It's because we gave them a lot of the same kind of features as the developer sandbox in terms of what they can hold, although we learned that maybe that's not, the limits aren't as hard as we think. But we tell you that the limits are about the same as the developer sandbox. And the lifespan, of course, is 1 to 30 days. You could call a delete command any time within that. I've had scratch orgs that have lasted, all of 5 minutes. But we don't let you have them last any longer than 30 days. That's a hard limit. There's nothing we can do about it. They go away. Because scratch orgs also have this thing up here called org shape, which is not the most straightforward name, perhaps. I think about it a little bit like when you're reading any of our documents about integration, and where Salesforce in those documents is always the center of the universe looking out upon the world. When you think about org shape, it's essentially the same paradigm of, to Salesforce, that means what is this org allowed to do on our platform? It's about limits and permissions for an org, not anything that you may have done to make your org unique, like adding a custom object, like adding a field. From a Salesforce point of view, that's all metadata. What you can give to a scratch org is, I've turned on Einstein chatbots. I have Community Cloud. I am this edition of org. It's those sorts of feature set permission things that make your org special or give it the shape that it has on our platform to do what it does that you can put into a scratch org. And it means you can also do proof of concepts in a scratch org, because there are feature permissions that if you try to get them turned on in your sandbox, you're going to be talking to someone who talks to your company about contracts and licensing and money. And in a sandbox, they're free to turn on because we know they're only there for 30 days. So if it's, and more internally, we're aligning on asking teams to make sure their amazing features are exposed as scratch org configuration values so that you can turn them on. So, and that's a commitment that the team is making because we want you to be able to explore these features, to be able to use the power of the fact that scratch orgs don't match production necessarily, means you can do a lot with them. And when to use which environment, I want to put a star by the development type model here that gets back to our org and package-based development. This doesn't mean you cannot use scratch orgs with org-based development. That's not true at all. It just means when the team built scratch orgs, the development style that they were thinking of, that scratch orgs are optimized for, is package-based development, modular development, where you need to spin something up very quickly. You have the source of truth and source control, and you can put it in there and get going. You can use scratch orgs in org-based development, but you need to think about the fact that it's not necessarily going to match production in the way a sandbox does, and be careful that you're using them to give you the right kind of features. Okay, so dependency management here, essentially, the top part says, there are no canonical limits yet that we can tell you of this is the right size for a package. It depends on your org. Those horizontal slices. How big is too big? Oh, you're going to know when your developers say the experience stinks, or when it takes way too long to push or pull from a scratch org. How small is too small? Same thing. When it's too much to manage. You're going to have to help your team build new skills as you adopt these things, and there aren't any hard and fast patterns that you can just refer to. It's going to have to be a lot of judgment of working with it and talking with your team and deciding, is this good enough for us? And for how long is this good enough? Same thing about dependencies. So you can do things like putting dependency injection in your code. When you think about introducing that, you need to also think about who's here in the room today and who's here tomorrow. This is how you're going to tell the platform how to treat your metadata. So if you're going to move, or package version create, those commands. So if you're going to move from something that's not in a package to a package, you're going to be using the packaging commands, and you're going to issue a package version create command. Congratulations. If you're going to move from a package to unpackaged metadata, take stuff out, then you just take the metadata out of the package and then issue another package version create command. Congratulations. If you want to then delete the metadata that you got rid of in that package, get it out of your org forever, you'll use upgrade type delete, and then the platform will take the differences and delete it from your org. If you want to just move it out of one package, deleting it from the package, and you've moved it then into another package, you use this deprecate only upgrade type. So you can swap things around. We're not deleting it. We're just changing how it's organized. If you're going to do a hot fix, essentially you want to make it unpackaged. right into production, you're going to use that upgrade type again here to get it out of your org. Oh, and okay, those are all our how to deal with packages commands. I have a little bit of roadmap here. It's a little bit out of date, but you can see that in winter 20, which is hitting our scratch orgs and our sandboxes, we have things like hopefully we're going to be able to announce soon, I don't think it's quite there yet, the beta of scratch org shape. So scratch org shape is what I just talked about, those licensing and features, that essentially we're going to let you say, can you just please look at my production org and tell me what the shape of it is so that I can have a scratch org that has that shape. And in the pilot and beta phase, the cool thing that you're going to get is that you're going to get to see that shape file, that config.json. So you can see the markup yourself and be like, oh, that's in there, which is pretty cool. And then scratch org snapshots are a little bit different. That's if you've done, like we were talking about, which is mentioned, you have 20 managed packages that you need to install in a scratch org and you get it set up just perfectly, you can essentially snapshot that scratch org. And you'll get an ID that you can use to then tell the CLI, hey, give me a scratch org that is like this snapshot that I took. So essentially making it easier for you to spin up special kinds of scratch orgs is coming soon. Then we're also going to give you the ability to compute code coverage on a per package basis so that you can see within a package what's happening with your code coverage, and just some things around metadata fixes, metadata support. There are some things coming with the hopefully announcement of second generation packaging GA that we are trying to do with like dependency management and install validation that are coming. And then in spring, of course, just getting GA or more control, deleting package versions, and hopefully that ability to create special kinds of scratch orgs coming soon. So with that, I think I have some resources for you. I made a trail mix with stuff. I got the special amazing permission to put all kinds of things into a trail mix. So this thing has links to a sample app repo that is our packaging sample app that shows you how to handle package dependencies and things like that. There's webinars on there. There's blog posts. There's a whole bunch of resources. Getting out of the way of all the cameras. So you can follow that trail mix. And I have another one also for org-based development that's kind of the same, that has webinars and things about the other styles of releases if you want to follow that as well. And with that, I'm thrilled to take questions. Yeah.
I can shout, I'm fine.
Great.
So if I'm a developer, I'm a release manager, and it's time for me to build a new package, that package is an artifact by any pretty much test that matters. So how can I be confident where that artifact lives?
So the artifact lives in a special invisible place relative to, that's a great question, of the dev hub. So this is a change. For people that, this came up, I think, in a recent conversation I had about, well, what's the difference between this and like a package XML or an unmanaged package? The difference here is that when you call that package version create command, what we're looking at to create the package is what's defined in the whatever file you pass into that create command. So it's already externalized from an org. We will not look at an org to decide this package should be created. We're already looking at something in source, in a format that you tell us, go look at this file over here. It's step one. Step two is whatever you have authenticated the CLI that's issuing that command to as the dev hub, it's also defining that package version relative to that dev hub. So if you want to do more management of it, or say, tell me more about this package, and you're not authenticated against that dev hub, we're going to say, this isn't your package to be dealing with, sorry.
So if I've got a client who is concerned about where all their IP is living, do I know that it's in the same data center as the org that the dev hub is? Or is it in the same data center as the dev hub, or is there no way to tell, like,
where the package version is living on that data center?
Or just in which country even, or like?
So that is a fantastic question to ask Dilip Berkey, who is the PM for packaging, because I don't know literally behind the scenes where they're storing that version information. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
How easy is it to change? How easy is it to change your mind? So what we're talking about is the situation you had earlier where we've kind of got our base package and then we've got like three packages on top.
Yep.
And I've built a Lightning Web component in one of those three packages, and then over time it kind of gets better and better. I think, wow, that'd be really useful in package B. So can I move that back into the base
Yes.
component?
Yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
Okay.
So the slide I showed, let's show this.
By the way back.
Yeah, this one. The spring release with this upgrade type flag brought a lot of that functionality of I need to change my mind. A lot of that came. The piece that's not there is the ability to delete unwanted packages and package versions, which seems, a lot of people in this room probably know why that's a big deal, but at first it may seem like not such a big deal because I can move things around and just make a new package and whatever. But as you're starting to try to manage your packages and your package versions, and the only way to see information about what you've done with that is by running the CLI commands and then sorting through the mass of data that's going to come back to you about what you've done against that dev hub with packaging. It can get very complex to remember, did I remember to pass enough information in the description of this package version so that I know exactly what this is? Or do we have enough things in source control so that we remember that version 2.3.1 was the one we liked here? So the fact that you can get much more robust, like we just need to get rid of this thing forever, is a huge piece of the puzzle. But you can change your mind. The question is, when you're doing that in production, right? So a while ago, I recommended people create packages and release all the way to maybe a full copy sandbox and do that for a couple releases. And that was because the technology was younger. It was still, I think, beta, maybe just coming up on GA. It's GA now, it's been GA for a while, so the technology itself is a whole lot more mature and robust. But I think for your team's sanity, to make sure you're not accidentally breaking somebody's workflow, you might want to adopt a similar kind of implementation pattern of release to a high fidelity environment so you know you can trust in that package version, but maybe not to production until your team is absolutely sure you know how to build around that artifact.
And so does that apply to ISPs as well? So yeah, I'm thinking from an ISP standpoint rather than into an org. So
yeah.
If I've got, let's say I've deployed this Lightning component into the sort of mini package,
Sure.
as it were, I want to move that back into the main package. Is that going to cause an issue?
It shouldn't unless you're having crossing namespaces. And again, it's going to be the same issues that you'd have with any Lightning web component against namespaces and Locker service.
Sure, but then the whole point of managed packages, you have one namespace, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that you get that control of the modularity of metadata. Yes. Yep.
Speaking of managed packages, is it possible to force an upgrade of an unlocked package?
To a customer
Yeah.
of an unlocked package or a second gen, you mean?
Second gen, sorry, yes?
Yeah, I just want to make, I don't know.
Okay.
I do not know. Yeah.
You made a comment just there about using one namespace with this, but isn't there still a strategy like the stuff at the start would make it easy for developers if you still use multiple namespaces, depending on how you break it down?
Yeah, so that's, sorry for all the animations here. Okay, this thing that I didn't talk about down here. So custom metadata types to your friends, we already sort of mentioned that they're awesome. This is one way that people have thought about being brilliant to get around that, is to use platform events, which we have a thing called limits. Be careful about them. That's an expensive proposition, I think, right now in terms of the way that we limit platform events. You want to be very careful about needing to go to that extent just to get modularity in your packages. Right now, especially with Lightning Web Components and the implications of Locker service, there is complexity around cross namespace communication that just it's just difficult right now. And that's about the best news I can give you.
I think that's all. Is anyone?
Great.
Any last questions? And we don't, it's not often we get
Awesome.
to real Salesforce employees like this. Everyone should think of really hard ones. In that case, I think
Great.
it's just best to say thank you very much, Zayne.
Thank you.